The illusion of availability. Have you ever noticed how some people have a seemingly supernatural control over the environment around them? They don't shout, they don't beg, and yet, without saying a word, everything around them shifts. People begin to chase after them, question them, and feel drawn to them. Now imagine if you did the same. What if you stopped reacting instantly to everything around you? What if, instead of automatically responding to every demand, you chose silence? What would happen if you withdrew? The game would change. When you stop being available, emotionally, physically, and psychologically, the world around you goes into crisis. People are used to controlling you through your reactions, impulses, and predictability. The day you choose to retreat, everything changes. The people who thought they knew you will realize they don't know you at all. But this phenomenon runs deeper than social dynamics. Carl Jung understood that withdrawal is not about running away from the world. It's about returning to yourself. In his concept of introversion, Jung revealed that turning inward is not weakness. It's a fundamental psychological orientation that allows for deep self-knowledge and authentic power. Jung observed that libido, psychic energy, naturally flows in two directions: outward toward the world, extroversion, and inward toward the self, introversion. Most people have been conditioned to constantly direct their energy outward, responding to every demand, reacting to every stimulus, engaging with every provocation. This creates what Jung called energy depletion, a state where your psychic resources are scattered and weakened. When you withdraw, you're not being antisocial. You're practicing what Jung termed energy conservation. You're allowing your libido to flow inward, where it can be consolidated, purified, and redirected with conscious intention. This is why people with natural withdrawal tendencies often possess a mysterious magnetism. Their energy is concentrated, not scattered. Think about the most influential people in history. They all understood the power of strategic withdrawal. Buddha withdrew under the Bodhi tree. Jesus withdrew to the desert. Even in modern times, the most powerful leaders know when to disappear from public view, creating anticipation and mystery around their next move. The psychological mechanism behind this is what Jung called the tension of opposites. When you're constantly available, you create no tension, no mystery, no space for others to project their desires and curiosities onto you. But when you withdraw, you create a vacuum that naturally draws people toward you. They begin to wonder, what are you thinking? What are you planning? Why aren't you responding the way you used to? This withdrawal isn't manipulation, it's individuation in action. Jung's individuation process requires periods of solitude, introspection, and separation from collective pressures. When you withdraw, you're not punishing others. You're giving yourself the space to discover who you really are beneath all the roles, expectations, and reactive patterns. The people who have this supernatural control you mentioned aren't using tricks or techniques. They've simply learned to inhabit their own psychological space fully. They've developed what Jung called psychological containment, the ability to hold their emotions, thoughts, and reactions within themselves until they choose to express them consciously. Carl Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to a better understanding of ourselves." Think about it. When you become inaccessible, who really gets desperate? Who gets irritated? Who tries to provoke you just to get a reaction? This reveals more about them than about you. It shows how much you've been manipulated without realizing it. You've been giving yourself away to please others, to maintain peace, to avoid losing people who were never truly with you. Every forced yes, every emotional response, every immediate reaction takes a piece of your energy. At the end of the day, what's left? Tiredness, frustration, a sense of emptiness you can't explain. That's because you've been too available for people who didn't deserve even a minute of your silence. Jung's concept of projection explains exactly what happens when you withdraw. The people who become desperate, irritated, or provocative are revealing their own psychological material. They've been projecting their needs, insecurities, and unresolved issues onto you, using your availability as a screen for their inner dramas. When you're constantly available, you become what Jung called a projection hook, a person onto whom others unconsciously project their psychological content. The needy person projects their abandonment fears onto you, making your unavailability feel like rejection. The The controlling person projects their power needs onto you, making your boundaries feel like rebellion. The emotionally unstable person projects their chaos onto you, making your calm feel like indifference. But here's the crucial insight. These projections were never about you. They were about the unconscious psychological material that these people haven't faced in themselves. Your withdrawal doesn't create their desperation. It simply reveals the desperation that was already there, hidden beneath the surface of their interactions with you. Jung identified what he called psychological vampirism, people who unconsciously drain others' psychic energy to avoid facing their own inner work. These individuals have learned to regulate their emotional states through external means rather than developing internal resources. They need constant validation, attention and response from others to feel stable. When you're always available, you enable this psychological vampirism. You become an external ego for people who haven't developed their own psychological strength. They learn to rely on your reactions to feel real, your attention to feel valued, your emotional responses to feel connected to life itself. The exhaustion you feel at the end of the day isn't just physical tiredness, it's what Jung called psychic depletion. You've been lending your psychological energy to others, allowing them to use your emotional stability as a substitute for their own inner development. This creates a codependent dynamic, where they need your availability to function and you need their need to feel important. Jung's exploration of complexes reveals another layer of this dynamic. A complex is an emotionally charged cluster of ideas that operates autonomously in the unconscious. Many people carry a savior complex or a people-pleasing complex that compels them to be constantly available to others. This complex promises that if you're helpful enough, available enough, giving enough, you'll finally receive the love and acceptance you crave. But complexes are never satisfied. The savior complex always finds another person to save. The people-pleasing complex always finds another person to please. Meanwhile, your authentic self, what Jung called your true individuality, gets buried under layers of reactive availability. The anima and animus projections also play a crucial role in availability dynamics. Men often project their anima, unconscious feminine, onto women, expecting them to be constantly nurturing, available, and emotionally responsive. Women often project their animus, unconscious masculine, onto men, expecting them to be constantly strong, decisive, and protective. When you're always available, you become a carrier for these archetypal projections, losing yourself in the process. Jung observed that healthy relationships require psychological boundaries. When two people are constantly available to each other, they merge psychologically, losing their individual identity and creating what he called unconscious identity. This isn't love. It's psychological fusion that ultimately destroys both individuals' capacity for authentic relating. The irritation that others feel when you become unavailable is actually their psyche's reaction to having their projections withdrawn. Suddenly, they're forced to face their own emotional states without using you as a buffer. This is uncomfortable for them, but it's also potentially transformative. Your withdrawal can catalyze their own individuation process if they're willing to do the inner work. This video is not about turning your back on the world. It's about choosing yourself. It's about learning what Jung called individuation, the process of becoming whole, authentic, and complete. This process begins when you realize that silence can be stronger than 1,000 arguments. When you understand that retreating, when it comes from awareness and not escape, is an act of power. How long will you continue being controlled by the emotions of others? How long will you react like a puppet every time someone pushes your buttons? Maybe it's time to cut those strings, to withdraw, to become a mystery. Jung's individuation process is perhaps the most misunderstood concept in psychology. Most people think individuation means becoming selfish or antisocial, but Jung was clear. Individuation is about becoming your authentic self so that you can relate to others from a place of wholeness rather than need. The word individual comes from the Latin individuus, meaning indivisible or whole. When you choose yourself through conscious withdrawal, you're not dividing yourself from others. You're making yourself whole so that your relationships can be based on choice rather than compulsion, love rather than dependency, strength rather than weakness. Jung identified several stages in the individuation process, and withdrawal plays a crucial role in each stage. The dissolution of the persona. Your persona is the mask you wear to be socially acceptable. Constant availability is often a persona strategy. You've learned that being helpful, responsive, and accommodating makes you likable, but this persona isn't your true self. It's a social construction that may have served you in the past, but now limits your authentic expression. Withdrawal allows you to step back from persona-based interactions and discover who you are beneath the mask. Confronting the shadow. Your shadow contains all the aspects of yourself that you've repressed or disowned. For many people, the shadow includes their capacity to say no, to disappoint others, to be unavailable, to prioritize their own needs. Conscious withdrawal is often the first step in integrating these shadow qualities. You're not being mean or selfish, you're reclaiming disowned aspects of your psychological wholeness. Withdrawing projections. As you individuate, you begin to recognize how much of your energy has been lost through projection. You've been seeing your own unlived potential in others, your own strength in authority figures, your own wisdom in teachers and gurus. Withdrawal allows you to pull back these projections and discover these qualities within yourself. Connecting with the self. Jung used self, with a capital S, to refer to the organizing principle of the whole psyche, your deepest identity that transcends ego, persona, and social roles. The self can only be accessed through solitude, reflection, and conscious withdrawal from the noise and demands of the external world. This isn't escapism. It's the most courageous journey you can undertake. The transcendent function emerges during the individuation process as you learn to hold the tension between opposing psychological forces. Instead of automatically reacting to others' emotions, you develop the capacity to hold both their needs and your boundaries, both your compassion and your self-protection, both your desire to help and your need for solitude. Jung observed that every act of individuation serves the collective. When you become whole and authentic, you stop contributing to the unconscious psychological dynamics that create chaos in relationships, families, and communities. You become a source of stability rather than a mirror for others' projections. You model what it looks like to be psychologically sovereign. The silence you mention isn't passive, it's what Jung called active silence. This is the silence of someone who has something valuable to say, but chooses their words carefully. It's the silence of someone who has strong emotions, but doesn't let those emotions control their actions. It's the silence of someone who loves deeply, but doesn't sacrifice their integrity for approval. Becoming a mystery isn't about being manipulative or playing games. It's about recovering your psychological depth. When you're constantly available and reactive, you become psychologically one-dimensional. People think they know you because they know how you'll respond to various stimuli. But when you withdraw, you create space for your deeper psychological contents to emerge. Jung's concept of psychological types reveals that withdrawal serves different functions for different people. For natural introverts, withdrawal is a necessary energy source. For natural extroverts, withdrawal is a balancing force that prevents energy dissipation. For thinking types, withdrawal provides space for analysis and understanding. For feeling types, withdrawal allows for emotional processing and values clarification. The individuation process isn't a one-time event. It's a lifelong journey of becoming more conscious, more authentic, more whole. Each time you choose yourself over automatic availability, you're taking another step in this process. Each time you withdraw from reactive patterns, you're creating space for your true individuality to emerge. You've been conditioned since childhood to believe that your worth lies in how available you are to others. We've been taught to always be present, to respond quickly, to please, to say yes even when we want to say no. But here's the truth. This excessive availability is not a virtue, it's a prison. As long as you believe you need to be accessible at all times, you'll be manipulated, drained, and forgotten as soon as you're no longer useful. Being available makes you predictable, and everything that is predictable becomes a tool. People start using you as an emotional emergency button, pressing it when they need attention, relief, or validation, and then putting you back on the shelf. Jung's analysis of family dynamics reveals how this conditioning begins. In his work on the family complex, Jung showed how children learn to regulate their parents' emotional states through compliance, performance, and availability. The child who learns to soothe an anxious mother, entertain a depressed father, or mediate between conflicting parents develops what we might call an availability complex. This complex carries a deep belief: my worth depends on my usefulness to others. The child learns that love is conditional on being helpful, responsive, and accommodating. This creates what Jung called a false self, a personality structure built around others' needs rather than authentic self-expression. The collective shadow of our culture reinforces this conditioning. We live in a society that profits from your availability, your constant connection to devices, your immediate responses to messages, your willingness to work overtime, your readiness to consume and respond to endless streams of information and demands. The cultural message is clear: to be valuable, you must be accessible. But Jung understood that psychological health requires boundaries. In his concept of psychological containers, he showed how the psyche needs protected spaces where it can process experiences, integrate learning, and develop authentic responses. Constant availability destroys these containers, leaving you psychologically fragmented and reactive. The mother archetype and father archetype projections often drive excessive availability. People who carry these archetypal energies feel compelled to nurture, protect, and provide for others, even at the expense of their own well-being. The archetypal mother feels guilty for being unavailable. The archetypal father feels responsible for solving everyone's problems. These archetypal identifications can become psychological prisons. Jung's exploration of inflation reveals another cost of excessive availability. When you constantly respond to others' needs, you can develop an inflated sense of your own importance. You begin to believe that others can't function without you, that you're indispensable, that your availability is a gift to the world. This inflation masks a deeper insecurity and creates a psychological trap where you need to be needed. The puer aeternus and puella aeterna complexes, eternal child archetypes, also contribute to availability patterns. People with these complexes often remain emotionally available to everyone because they fear the responsibility of adult boundaries. They want to be liked by everyone, to avoid conflict, to maintain the freedom that comes from not making difficult choices about who deserves their time and energy. Jung identified psychological boundaries as essential for mental health. These boundaries aren't walls that separate you from others. They're permeable membranes that allow you to choose what you let in and what you keep out. When you have no boundaries, you become a psychological sponge, absorbing everyone's emotions, problems, and demands. The predictability you mentioned creates what Jung called unconscious identity. When people know exactly how you'll respond, they begin to treat you as an extension of themselves rather than as a separate individual. They don't consider your needs, feelings, or limitations because they've unconsciously merged with you. Your availability has erased your psychological distinctiveness. Psychological manipulation often operates through availability expectations. Manipulative people test your boundaries by making increasingly unreasonable demands on your time and energy. If you consistently comply, they learn that you can be controlled through guilt, obligation, or the threat of disapproval. Your excessive availability trains others to treat you poorly. Jung's concept of the inferior function explains why availability patterns are so difficult to break. For many people, saying no and setting boundaries represents their inferior function, their least developed psychological capacity. This function feels uncomfortable, unfamiliar, and anxiety-provoking. It's easier to continue the familiar pattern of availability than to develop this uncomfortable capacity. The anima possession in men and animus possession in women can drive compulsive availability. A man possessed by his anima might feel compelled to be emotionally available to everyone, sacrificing his own needs to avoid seeming uncaring. A woman possessed by her animus might feel driven to solve everyone's problems, sacrificing her own well-being to avoid seeming incompetent. Carl Jung spoke about the persona, the mask we wear to be accepted, loved, and recognized. This mask keeps you overly available. You say okay when you're suffocating. You respond to messages even when exhausted. You justify yourself, defend yourself, as if you owe the world an explanation. But the more you place yourself at the center of others' stage, the more you disappear from your own. Being available all the time is a subtle form of self-abandonment. It's a disguised way of seeking approval, avoiding rejection, and trying to control the image others have of you. But this control comes at a price. The price is your peace. Your energy is being spent as if it's infinite when in reality it's limited. Jung's persona theory goes far deeper than social masks. The persona is actually a functional complex, an autonomous psychological system that operates according to its own logic and goals. Once the persona is established, it begins to live its own life, making decisions and commitments that may conflict with your authentic desires and needs. The pleasing persona is particularly insidious because it disguises itself as virtue. You tell yourself you're being kind, helpful, or loving, but underneath, the persona is actually trying to control others' perceptions and avoid the anxiety of potential rejection. This isn't authentic kindness. It's strategic accommodation designed to maintain psychological safety. Jung observed that persona identification occurs when you begin to believe that your mask is your true self. You lose touch with your authentic desires, feelings, and needs because the persona has become so dominant. The pleasing persona promises that if you're accommodating enough, available enough, helpful enough, you'll finally receive the unconditional love and acceptance you crave. But the persona's promises are never fulfilled because authentic love cannot be earned through performance. The more you try to please others, the more you attract people who are attracted to your pleasing behavior rather than your authentic self. This creates relationships based on transaction rather than genuine connection. The shadow of the pleasing persona contains all the aspects of yourself that you've repressed in order to maintain your accommodating image. Your anger, your needs, your boundaries, your authentic preferences, your capacity to disappoint others. These shadow qualities don't disappear, they go underground, creating internal tension and eventually erupting in unexpected ways. Jung's concept of psychological inflation explains why people-pleasing is ultimately self-defeating. When you consistently prioritize others' needs over your own, you can develop an inflated sense of your own virtue and importance. You begin to see yourself as uniquely caring, selfless, and giving. This inflation masks deeper feelings of inadequacy and creates resentment when others don't appreciate your sacrifices. The self-abandonment you mention is actually a form of psychological suicide. Each time you say yes when you mean no, each time you accommodate when you need to resist, each time you explain when you don't owe an explanation, you're killing a little piece of your authentic self. Over time, this creates what Jung called personality fragmentation. Complex psychology reveals that the pleasing persona often develops as a response to early trauma or neglect. Children who experience conditional love, love that was only available when they were good, learn to split off their authentic needs and emotions to maintain the connection with their caregivers. This creates a pleasing complex that continues to operate in adult relationships. Jung's understanding of psychological energy shows why people-pleasing is so exhausting. Every time you act against your authentic nature, you create internal conflict that consumes psychic energy. You're essentially maintaining two personalities, the authentic self that wants to say no and the persona that says yes. This internal division is energetically expensive. The collective expectations that drive people-pleasing are often rooted in what Jung called cultural complexes. Different cultures have different expectations about availability, service, and accommodation. In some cultures, individual needs are seen as selfish. In others, saying no is interpreted as rejection or hostility. These cultural complexes can override individual psychological needs. Projection plays a crucial role in people-pleasing patterns. You may project your own need for acceptance onto others, assuming that they need you to be constantly available and accommodating. But often others would actually respect you more if you had clear boundaries and authentic responses to their requests. Jung's concept of the transcendent function offers a path beyond people-pleasing. Instead of automatically saying yes or no, you can develop the capacity to hold the tension between your desire to help and your need for boundaries between your care for others and your care for yourself. This creates space for creative responses that honor both your authentic self and your genuine care for others. The individuation process requires what Jung called differentiation from the collective. This means developing the capacity to think, feel, and act according to your own values and needs, rather than automatically conforming to others' expectations. This isn't selfishness, it's psychological maturity. People who want you available all the time don't really want you. They want what you provide: validation, company, distraction, emotional comfort. But when you change, when you set a boundary, when you stop reacting, those same people get irritated. They accuse you, say you're different, and get uncomfortable. It's not because you've changed, it's because you stopped being functional for them. The more available you are, the less value others place on you. What is too abundant becomes disposable. No one respects what they don't have to earn. Jung's analysis of unconscious manipulation reveals the sophisticated psychological mechanisms that operate beneath surface interactions. Most manipulation isn't conscious or malicious. It's the automatic result of unconscious complexes seeking to maintain their psychological equilibrium through external means. The power complex drives some people to seek constant validation and control through others' availability. These individuals have learned to regulate their sense of self-worth through their ability to summon responses from others. Your availability feeds their power complex, confirming their importance and influence. When you withdraw, their complex is threatened, triggering anxiety and attempts to restore the previous dynamic. Jung identified what he called psychological symbiosis, relationships where individuals become psychologically dependent on each other in unconscious ways. In these relationships, one person's emotional stability depends on the other's availability and responsiveness. This isn't love. It's unconscious mutual exploitation disguised as care or friendship. The emotional vampire is someone who has learned to maintain their psychological equilibrium by drawing energy from others. They've never developed internal resources for emotional regulation, so they require constant external input: attention, sympathy, validation, entertainment. Your availability enables their psychological immaturity by providing the external ego support they should be developing internally. Narcissistic supply is Jung's term for the attention and validation that narcissistic individuals require to maintain their fragile self-image. People with narcissistic complexes literally depend on others' responses to feel real and valuable. When you're constantly available, you become a reliable source of narcissistic supply. When you withdraw, their psychological house of cards begins to collapse. The abandonment complex drives some people to demand constant availability from others. These individuals carry deep wounds from early experiences of loss, neglect, or abandonment. They've learned to manage their abandonment anxiety by ensuring that important people in their lives are always accessible. Your availability soothes their complex, but it also prevents them from healing their core wound. Jung's concept of psychological projection explains why these individuals become upset when you change. They've been projecting their own psychological needs onto you, seeing you as an extension of themselves rather than as a separate individual with your own needs and boundaries. When you assert your independence, you force them to confront their projections and face their own psychological material. The mother complex and father complex often drive manipulation through availability demands. Someone with an unresolved mother complex might expect others to be constantly nurturing and available, just as they needed their mother to be. Someone with a father complex might demand constant attention and validation, recreating the dynamic they wanted with their father. Emotional blackmail is a common response when you begin to withdraw your availability. This might take the form of guilt trips. You've changed, you don't care about me anymore. Threats of abandonment. Fine, I won't bother you again. Or attempts to provoke your old reactive patterns through criticism or crisis creation. Jung understood that healthy relationships require mutual respect for psychological boundaries. When someone cannot accept your need for unavailability, they're revealing their own psychological immaturity. They're showing you that they relate to you as an object for their use, rather than as a subject with your own inner life and needs. The scarcity principle from psychology explains why withdrawal increases your value in others' eyes. What is readily available is taken for granted. What requires effort to access is perceived as more valuable. When you're constantly available, you train others to devalue your time, attention, and energy. When you become selectively available, you restore the natural appreciation for your presence. Intermittent reinforcement is one of the most powerful psychological principles for maintaining others' interest and investment. When your availability becomes unpredictable rather than constant, others become more attentive and invested in their interactions with you. This isn't manipulation, it's natural human psychology. Jung's compensation principle shows that psychological systems naturally seek balance. When you've been overly available, the psyche will eventually compensate by creating situations that force you to withdraw. This might manifest as illness, exhaustion, crisis, or simply an overwhelming urge to disappear. It's better to withdraw consciously before your psyche forces the issue. Now stop and think. Who truly deserves your time, attention, presence, and energy? Who deserves your absence? But before answering that, we need to explore why we react so much, why we give in so easily. What is behind this automatic desire to respond, justify, and please? The answer lies in Carl Jung's concept of psychic energy. Your energy is all you have, and if you don't learn to protect it, someone will use it against you. Every time you react impulsively, you waste psychic energy. You defend yourself against criticism that didn't even deserve your attention. You respond to provocations just to prove you're right. You engage in pointless discussions. You try to please people who don't value you. This inner strength is drained without return. Jung understood that a healthy psyche knows how to conserve energy. It knows when to say no without guilt, when to remain silent without feeling cowardly, when to observe before acting. True power is not in reacting. It is in choosing when and how to act. This is possible only when you know yourself well enough to recognize your own impulses. So, start observing your triggers. Start paying attention to what makes you react automatically. These are the points where your energy escapes. That's where you need to work. Not to become cold or indifferent, but to be selective, to be sovereign over yourself. Jung's libido theory provides the foundation for understanding psychic energy management. Libido isn't just sexual energy, it's the total psychic energy available to an individual for psychological development, creative expression, and meaningful relationship. This energy is finite and precious. How you invest it determines the quality and direction of your life. Conscious unavailability is actually a form of energy conservation that allows your libido to accumulate and be directed toward your highest priorities and deepest values. When you're constantly reactive and available, your energy becomes scattered and diluted. When you practice conscious withdrawal, your energy becomes concentrated and powerful. The reaction patterns you mention are what Jung called autonomous complexes, psychological subsystems that operate independently of conscious control. These complexes have their own emotional charge and behavioral patterns. The defensive complex makes you automatically defend against criticism. The approval complex makes you automatically try to please others. The rightness complex makes you automatically argue when you feel misunderstood. Jung's active imagination technique can help you identify and dialogue with these complexes. Instead of being controlled by your automatic reactions, you can develop a conscious relationship with the psychological forces that drive them. You might discover that your defensive reactions are driven by a wounded child complex that's trying to protect you from shame. Your people-pleasing might be driven by an abandoned child complex that's terrified of rejection. Psychological sovereignty means becoming the conscious ruler of your own psychological kingdom. This requires developing what Jung called ego-self axis, a strong connection between your conscious mind, ego, and your deeper psychological center, self. When this connection is strong, you can observe your impulses without being controlled by them, feel your emotions without being overwhelmed by them, and choose your responses based on wisdom rather than reactivity. The trigger identification process Jung developed involves amplification. exploring the associations, memories, and emotions connected to your automatic reactions. When someone's criticism triggers your defensive response, you can explore: what does this criticism remind you of? What early experiences created this sensitivity? What part of you feels threatened? This exploration transforms unconscious reactions into conscious choices. Energy leakage occurs through what Jung called psychological wounds, unhealed traumas, unresolved conflicts, and unintegrated shadow material. Each wound creates a point of vulnerability, where your energy can be drained by others' projections, manipulations, or simply by your own internal conflicts. Healing these wounds through conscious inner work is essential for energy conservation. Jung's concept of psychological types reveals that different people have different natural patterns of energy investment and conservation. Introverted types naturally conserve energy through withdrawal and need regular periods of solitude to recharge. Extroverted types naturally invest energy in external activities, but still need to learn conscious boundaries to prevent depletion. The thinking function conserves energy by analyzing situations before responding, avoiding emotional reactions that waste psychic resources. The feeling function conserves energy by honoring personal values and only investing in relationships and activities that align with what matters most. The sensation function conserves energy by staying grounded in present reality, rather than being drained by fantasies or anxieties. The intuition function conserves energy by trusting inner guidance, rather than trying to control external outcomes. Conscious unavailability requires developing what Jung called holding the tension, the ability to contain your impulses and reactions long enough to choose your response consciously. This isn't repression or suppression. It's conscious containment that allows for reflection, discernment, and appropriate action. The observer self that Jung identified is the part of you that can watch your own psychological processes without being identified with them. This observer can notice when you're about to react automatically, recognize the complex or pattern that's been triggered, and create space for a conscious choice. Developing this observer function is essential for psychological sovereignty. Selective availability means consciously choosing who has access to your time, attention, and energy based on conscious criteria rather than unconscious compulsions. Jung suggested asking, does this person respect my boundaries? Do they invest in our relationship as much as they expect from it? Do they contribute to my psychological development or drain my energy? Am I relating to them authentically or through a persona? Jung's individuation process naturally leads to greater selectivity in relationships and availability. As you become more conscious of your authentic self, you become less willing to spend time and energy on relationships, activities, and commitments that don't align with your deeper truth. This isn't selfishness, it's psychological maturity. The self-care that Jung advocated isn't indulgence, it's psychological responsibility. Just as you wouldn't let someone physically harm your body, you shouldn't let others psychologically drain your energy. Protecting your psychic energy is protecting your capacity for consciousness, creativity, and authentic relationship. Boundaries in Jungian psychology aren't walls. They're membranes that allow beneficial exchanges while filtering out harmful influences. Healthy boundaries are permeable, flexible, and consciously maintained. They allow love, support, and meaningful connection to flow while preventing manipulation, exploitation, and energy drainage. If this message resonated with you, if you feel ready to take control of your energy, to protect your peace and to stop being manipulated, I invite you to subscribe, like this video, and share it with those who need to hear it. As Carl Jung said, we do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. It's time to step into your power. Let's continue this journey together. The path toward conscious unavailability is not about becoming isolated or cold. It's about becoming psychologically mature. Jung understood that true maturity involves the capacity to relate to others from a place of wholeness rather than need, strength rather than weakness, consciousness rather than reactivity. Making the darkness conscious means bringing awareness to all the unconscious patterns, complexes, and wounds that have been driving your availability and reactivity. This shadow work isn't pleasant, but it's essential for psychological freedom. When you can see your patterns clearly, you can choose differently. The individuation journey that Jung mapped out is essentially a journey toward authentic selfhood. This self isn't selfish. It's the deepest, truest, most conscious version of who you are. When you live from this authentic self, your relationships become more honest, your work becomes more meaningful, and your life becomes an expression of your deepest values rather than a reaction to others' expectations. Psychological sovereignty is your birthright, but it must be claimed consciously. No one will give you permission to be selective with your availability. No one will hand you the keys to your own psychological kingdom. You must take them. The people who truly love and respect you will support your journey toward greater consciousness and authenticity. They will understand when you need space, respect your boundaries, and value the quality of your presence over the quantity of your availability. The people who resist your growth, who guilt you for having boundaries, who demand your constant availability, these people are revealing that they relate to you as an object for their use rather than as a conscious being deserving of respect. Trust the process. The journey toward conscious unavailability will initially feel uncomfortable. Your old patterns will resist change. People around you may react negatively to your new boundaries. Your own psyche may generate guilt, anxiety, or fear. This is normal and temporary. Jung called this the transcendent function, the psychological mechanism that creates new consciousness through the tension between old and new patterns. Jung understood that a healthy psyche knows how to conserve energy. It knows when to say no without guilt, when to remain silent without feeling cowardly, when to observe before acting. True power is not in reacting, it is in choosing when and how to act. This is possible only when you know yourself well enough to recognize your own impulses. So start observing your triggers. Start paying attention to what makes you react automatically. These are the points where your energy escapes. That's where you need to work. Not to become cold or indifferent, but to be selective, to be sovereign over yourself. Closing thoughts. If this message resonated with you, if you feel ready to take control of your energy, to protect your peace, and to stop being manipulated, I invite you to subscribe, like this video, and share it with those who need to hear it. As Carl Jung said, we do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. It's time to step into your power. Let's continue this journey together.